You have arrived at the ET Newsroom with your host, Joanna Summerscales. Welcome. Be prepared. Be prepared. Buckle up. You are in for an interesting ride.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I have a gentleman with me all the way over in Canada. He had written to me and I saw that he had a link with Kitchener. It really piqued my interest because when I was a real wee one, we lived in Kitchener, Ontario, a link with my past. So I was very interested to hear what Murray Lusk, my guest today, has to say about his experiences, some of which began at a very early age. So Murray, welcome to the ETN Files, and I would love you to do a little bit of an introduction of a bit of your background, Murray, perhaps where you are now. I know you said you were in Kitchener for a good 40 years.
I did live in Kitchener for 40 years, where I spent the 60s and the 70s and 80s for a long time, and lots of memories. But I was born in Ottawa, August 1st, 1955. We relocated down to Kitchener in the summer of 1960, just before I started school. So basically, we moved around quite a bit. My father was a wild child, Scots-Irish fellow. My mother was French Métis from the Ile-de-Grande Calumet. So I had to have Métis recognition as well. But anyways, basically, I spent most of my life just trying to put the pieces of a puzzle together. It's like opening Pandora's box by degrees, and you find it only opens one way. I did experience the abduction phenomenon as a child. It was before the Betty and Barney Hill revelations of, I think it was 1965 and around when their revelations started emerging. But did experience, I had no way of defining it or putting it together, and it was corrosive. It did definitely color my childhood, and I think it affected many things, including my development on so many fronts.
What age were you when you had your experience?
The one I remember was 1963, somewhere in
Right.
1963, and I was still awake after a wicked nightmare. I basically had relocated to the far end of the bed so I could watch the hallway, and we had a back split. And basically, bad dream, and I was weeping at one point. Nobody came to help. Starting to fall asleep again, and then all of a sudden I saw a small gray appear at the base of the stairs to the left-hand side in our living room, and it started rising. And the stairwell and the hallway were well lit by two 100-watt bulbs. And at that point, my eyes widened. I sensed as it peeked around the corner that it was surprised to find me awake.
Because of the nightmare, you'd got up and out of your bed to try and get yourself out of it. Is that correct? And found yourself at the doorway to your bedroom, which led onto this hallway.
The doorway was always open.
Okay.
I always had a lot of nightmares as a child. And no, I wouldn't leave the bed. I just took my pillow from the end of the bed, which was in the corner of the bedroom, and I could watch the door and the hall and stairways leading down from our back split into our living room area. So it appeared around the left-hand side, the stairwell, clearly a gray, a small gray, started rising up the stairs. It looked like it was wearing a black skin-tight outfit. The last thing I remember, because I closed my eyes because I couldn't seem to do anything else. I was terrified. Basically, I just saw it rising about halfway up about 8 stairs. And then I saw it look behind itself over its right-hand corner as though I would think that others were going to follow it from where it had originally appeared. I closed my eyes, and about 10 seconds later, I felt a nice cold touch right in front of my right ear. And after that, it was an explosion of light in my head, and I remembered nothing until I woke up to a bright, beautiful day the next day. That's basically the actual event. It's just kind of what happened after the event. I rose from the bed. I was a little bit traumatized by it, trying to process it. And I ended up going across the street to what is now the Stanley Park Conservation Area. And standing at the edge of the woods there was quite an extensive acreage there of woods. Why am I experiencing these things in my life? And then I was asking other questions like, why was I having the difficulties with my father, who was cross-addicted, and he wreaked a lot of havoc on his family. So I dismissed that thing for years and years until I developed a precancerous skin lesion right in the area, the same area that I was diagnosed with, I think around 2011. And I think I had treatment for it shortly thereafter. It was precancerous, and they had to go in there with that little thing and burn it out. And my father was addicted to prescription drugs. So, of course, a lot of people dismiss my testimony just solely on the basis of that. What bothers me a little bit is that I've always felt there was a bit of a problem in the family that may have caused him to be the way he was. I don't remember anything after it touched me, Joanne, until I woke up in the same bed to a bright, beautiful day. All right. So I've never sought to be hypnotized other than once. And then they're talking about past life regressions and, all this stuff. And I said, well, this is not for me. Was conscious when the event started, but I believe that there were other events happening before
I'm with you.
Probably afterwards. But
you said that this had a huge impact on you, but I'm wondering also, Murray, you were only about 7 or 8 at the time. Do you think there were any attributes or faculties that became, enhanced as a result of that encounter?
I don't know. I strongly suspect that I tend to have a pretty good read on people. I tend to have a radar a little bit. I don't claim it's infallible, and I'm certainly no prophet or seer. But the thing is that I do have radar sometimes. I pick up things that other people don't seem to sense, and I get that hinky feeling. I don't disregard it. It served me well when I served as a correctional officer here in Ontario, and more often than not, it was right on the button. What I did find out, surprisingly, I presumed for years that my ancestors, mostly Scottish, were involved with spiritualism, extensively involved with spiritualism. And I believe that was the factor, that it opened doors. But the other issue is that I found out from the ICAR survey, and if I recollect, I think it was well over 50,000 respondents, that they've asked the blood type of people reporting abduction. And what came out of that was that people that are rhesus negative are inordinately targeted for the abduction phenomena. And I laughed at that. It was one of the times that I was caught being a presumptive individual, which I try not to be. And I laughed at that, and I laughed until I gave blood shortly thereafter. And I found out I was type OH negative. Okay. And as I mentioned to you, Joanne, that my brother, who is an atheist and type B, laughed about this connection to so-called, royal blood types. And I'm not trying to put on airs here. Please don't assume that. So I'm just saying it did turn out to be true. My brother is a trained historian, and he basically uncovered that we are connected to Shamalar, from our Shamalar line and the Ile-de-France. It goes back to I'm descendant of Radisson, the famous French explorer. I'm descendant of Charlemagne. And Merovingian dynasty, a separate connection through. Plus, there's a connection to a Jewish Exilarch called Bastos, resident of Babylon. His descendants intermarried. So, what does it all mean? I have absolutely no clue. So, why are they targeting OH negative? My belief is if you accept the idea of a mitochondrial Eve, whatever, there might be a root bloodline and might type OH negative and give to everybody without consequence, but we can only accept their own. Suggest maybe we are the original bloodline, not more, not less. Please, I don't want to say that because it gets so arrogant, but I'm not suggesting I am any more or any less than anybody else. I'm just trying to suggest what I believe. Type OH negative is 32% of the abductees reporting in the ICAR survey of over 50,000 respondents. I can't remember the exact number. I believe it was 58. Don't quote me on that total number, but it was 32% for type O, if I remember correctly, and type RH negative, which would be the A, B, or B, would rhesus negative, are also reporting a high incidence at 30%. The rest are type like positive, rhesus positive. I honestly believe from my discussions with a number of individuals that are rhesus positive, they're reporting that a number of their children are rhesus negative. So I am wondering if we're seeing them carrying it recessively.
The rhesus negative, the whole is only about 25,000 years old. It sounds like it's been injected into the human race specifically.
The whole core agenda of the abduction phenomenon, from my research, is essentially human hybridization. I agree with David M. Jacobs absolutely on that. These are things you cannot take into a laboratory and design a lovely scientific method with suitable controls and arrive at a lovely coefficient. It just doesn't happen. But the problem is in my experience is that it with other, and I've been doing this now for about 5 years. I've got lots of friends that are experiencers, and there are some common things. Again, a lot of times there's rhesus negative. I always ask them if they might have a connection to a royal line, and sometimes the rhesus positives indicate they do have a connection to a royal line. That's been surprising. You get so many people making up so many silly things about, people shape shifting, and listen, that's so silly. I think what it is that perhaps that we're just simply probably an original line, and the rest have been distorted. And the problem is maybe they're just trying to target the remnant. I don't know. That's what my honest belief is. When you open Pandora's box, is that rhesus negative individuals that are like type O Rh negative is 7% of the world's population. Rhesus negative in total, I think all the rhesus negatives are 15% of the total population of the world. Yet we're targeted inordinately by abduction. I don't think we're intrinsically evil.
No, not at all. I think there's just an interest, as you say, in the genetics. The blood wave seems to carry a higher psychic or intuitive or frequencies. But I don't know whether your parents or even your own children have had any experiences linking with the ET phenomena.
I've done what I believe is necessary to protect my children from this going on. It is an interdimensional phenomena. It is also intergenerational. And I had talked to a woman outside of a MUFON group one time that was strongly hitting. She had it happen in her life. And I said, this will go on generationally. And she looked at me and she says, you're right, it has. My daughters and my grandchildren are reporting it, but we just don't talk about it. And she just turned on her heel and walked away. Obviously, she didn't want to talk about it, which I think is very sad, because what it's going to do is virtually guarantee that your lineage is going to experience something that I believe is very horrific, all right, and not beneficial or life affirming unless you start to buy into their deceptions, because they're not here to help us. This has been going on since 1896, 1897, if not before. It's been going on big time since 1896, 1897. David M. Jacobs believes that, and I think to a large degree this idea that they're here to help us. Or I don't believe they're extraterrestrial. I believe they're interdimensional, and crystal clear. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, and that's fine. They can interpret their experiences any way they want. I'm going to try to interpret mine in such a way that I can stop this in my line. I don't want my children, and I talked about it with my family. I've lost family and friends over disclosure. It's bothered me, and I pointed to the U.S. government report to family and friends, and trying to say, well, guys, maybe you should be giving me a little bit of benefit of the doubt. I shared everything I've known about it, but for the most part, there's just a refusal to even look or consider the possibility. And meanwhile, it will go on, and that's what it's been. I think my mother was an abductee now. She died in 1977 at the age of 57, cancer. And two things that occurred in my childhood. She took me to a psychologist, a psychological team for testing in around 64, if I remember correctly. And they put me through a battery test, and I didn't think anything of it after that. My mom never raised the issue or talked to me subsequently about anything. Shortly before her death, 1977, and she said, Murray, you remember when we took you to that psychological, and she says, they said the funniest thing to me, Murray. She got, her very French Canadian blue eyes looking at me, and I said, well, what is that, Mom? And she said, when they were done testing with you, they said that you were above average intelligence, and you tested within normal parameters, but she said they felt that something was happening to you, and they said that they weren't sure what it is, and they said you weren't sane, and if that something didn't stop, you would go mad. And that's pretty strong terms for, like even in the 60s. And yes, that's what she said to me before her death in June 26, 1977.
Yeah.
So I believe now that she knew. And she took me to a doctor once where I had a physical exam, and the guy was berating me because there were times in my childhood that I would react, like a little bit of a hysterical way. I know that, kids coming out of addicted homes are going to have repercussions, epigenetical changes to the brain, possibly developing addictions themselves. And it is really problematic. But again, on top of that, there was something abduction. I had a friend of mine in California who was an abductee, and she said to me, Murray, you experienced abduction on top of everything else for your father. And I just went, wow. And I've had that word said to me a few times when I shared my story, or even one time I went to a guy that was supposed to be a deliverance counselor. And he said to me after listening to me, he said, wow. And I guess, maybe I'm just a tough old Matisse. I am registered with the Métis Nation of Canada.
And so you've been a corrections officer, as they call it over there. They call it a prison officer over here. I'm wondering if that's what
I'm
took
not
you
sure
into
if
that
it
correctional.
question, Joanne. It's
Okay.
empathy. It
Yeah.
was empathy and a chance to hopefully get a defined benefit pension plan. I'll be honest with you. I was 47 years old and I lost a job after I complained about unsafe radiation testing. A man died on the factory floor, and the company could care less. So I got laid off, lack of work. So I'm stuck basically in the age of 47 trying to rebuild a career, and that I did. And I ended up jumping through all the hoops, making it. Plus, building on some previous experience as a contract correctional officer in adult. But I went into youth because I felt this time I would try to take the agony that I remember and understood dealing with so many of these traumatic events in childhood, and see that maybe I might be able to make a difference. And sometimes I did, and maybe sometimes I didn't. It's pretty hard because corrections is rife with second guessing in politics. It's not the violence that kills you; it's the second guessing in the politics. I said I had a colleague commit suicide in 2007. So I certainly admire anybody that can last more than 10 years in corrections, because with corrections you deal with them all concentrated in one place with the endless mind games and whatever, and the staff are brutal on each other because the way there's just no mercy shown. You can't hack it, you can't hack it, right? And so if you get wounded or you start limping, God help you, the wolves circle and you're in big trouble. So I'm retired now, and my father's line does track back to a paranormal hotspot called Ghost Hill Farm in Quebec. It's what Ghost Hill Farm. It's now owned by the Nature Conservancy of Canada. It was bequeathed by Diane Aldred, who was one of the lineal descendants of Joseph Lusk, as I am. And he landed in 1820 and started clearing the land in the Ottawa Valley, just north of the Ottawa River. Well, historically, it was a place you just didn't transit after dark. And, there's all sorts of oral narratives associated with it. An Armenian peddler murdered for his pouch of coins. It's supposed to have been somebody pranked somebody dressed in an animal skin and was shot. There's lots of accidents. It's been known for orbs to light. Of course, I know the Gatineau hills to the north of the property are well associated with UFOs. And there's Lusk Caves and Lusk Falls, and there's a big Lusk cliff up there. And I didn't know about that property until 2001, but I had said to my sister in regards to my take on some of the family's problems, I felt that the family was being dogged by something spiritual. I was told that about the Ghost Hill Farm. My niece had found the reference. I didn't really even know about my grandmother, Laura Elizabeth Lusk, who was a Robinson. Before she married, she never even mentioned that. But she lost her husband in 1928, and my dad grew up at the age of 4 without a father. My mother's side, again, when she intermarried with the Scottish Lions, they were heavily involved with the Spiritualist Church. So I wasn't the only one having nightmares in the family. My sister did, and so did my other sisters. And there were other issues that caused me to be concerned. I believe there was a targeting process, and I did discern that intuitively by around late 90s. And when the Ghost Hill Farm emerged, that kind of blew me away, to be honest with you, because there was a cryptic reference I found on the internet that my Scottish great-grandfather, Joseph Lusk, may have had I don't know, temerity, is that the right word, to cut down the idol tree used by the Irish witches of Eardley Township. And there's a heavy Celtic influence in the area, right? And the thing is that if he did that without taking appropriate steps to protect his family, that might explain some of the targeting. I have been up there, as I said, on August 1st, 2010. I made a promise to God I would go, and on the eve of my 55th birthday, I decided to throw everything in the car and just go for it. I'd never been up there, but I promised God I was going to stand on the edge of that property and ask him to cleanse it. And that was what I wanted to do, and that's what I did.
Just to make it clear to everybody, because the audio isn't 100% clear for me either, that the Ghost Hill Farm and the area of Gatineau Heights, am I understanding correctly that was your family property at one point, or is it still?
No, it's been, it doesn't belong to anybody. It's descended from the Lusk line. It's been given to the Nature Conservancy of Canada and is now known as the Breckenridge Nature Preserve.
Was it your family property at one point?
No, it was my grandfather's property, a few times back. Well, what I believe is there's been something done on the land, which has been well known for frightening apparitions and everything else. Diane Aldred herself commented on seeing orbs of light when she was a little girl on the property. I don't think the Nature Conservancy Canada generally wants to continue basically emphasize. It is well known it's a paranormal hotspot, and as I said, I'm reporting as a descendant of Joseph Lusk that I seem to have paid a little bit of a price for something. And I'm pretty sure there's less descendants that haven't had experience with the thing. But again, maybe there's a confluence of things, being type O negative and the son of this man. Maybe they just target certain people in certain generations. I know what stopped it for me, and I try to share that. Basically, anybody's welcome to contact me on Facebook under my name, and I will be glad. If they identify themselves as abductees, I will be glad to share what stopped it. I won't get too much into that during this podcast. For one, it's not always received. And two, there are people that develop relationships with these so-called ETs. And while they might have some initially frightening experiences, all of a sudden they tell me they start having wonderful benign. I've talked to people that seem to have drawn their identity from this. I talked to one very, very lovely young woman out in Washington State, and she claims she went back in to fight them. Now, how she went back in, whether it was through an out-of-body projection type experience, I don't know. She claims that she found herself in that, but she clearly sees some of these ETs as evil and other ones as being positive. I see them to be the same thing, just like playing a good cop, bad cop type game. And I don't think they're here to help us at all. Cattle mutilations are horrific. I don't even like to think about that. And they started in 1967. I have my reasons as why these things are happening. There seem to be patterns to it. I don't claim to have it all figured out. Maybe that's a good thing. The woman I talked to outside the MUFON meeting, during the meeting, mentioned that they had cattle deaths and cattle mutilations. They had a lot of paranormal activity at their farm. It's not the farm. I think they're being targeted as a family. It's been targeted for a while. And the thing is that's what's got to be understood. This is not specific to being Irish or Scottish or French. What it is there's probably a big genetic reason with the rhesus negative. I don't know. My trauma basically caused me to, basically shake, rattle, and roll by the early 70s. I was struck down with a very severe anxiety disorder onset. That's common when you're here. And I developed alcoholism, but I'm 35 years sober now, as of October 15th. And basically, I turned to confront the butt ugly of my childhood. And I will allude to something I discovered today. There was a very prominent interviewer in the United States. I just saying, I saw this YouTube clip. Two abductees, brother and sister, onset in childhood. Around one little girl mentioned the age of 5. Basically, she was interrupting them. The attitude was, really kind of not skeptical, but almost like very interrogative and stuff. Anyways, Dr. Mack was sitting to their left-hand side. Now, Dr. Mack is dead, I think, since 1907 when he went over to a conference in England and died.
But, 2007, I think that was.
Positive. Yes. And the thing is these kids we're talking about, the first question I would have asked these young people, where of your blood type? Are you rhesus negative? Because that seems to be the strongest common factor that most abductees have. And again, I think the rhesus positives are carrying it recessively. Yeah, I said, do I think I accomplished anything going up to that farm? I don't know. I had a dream about 2 days later where something rolled up behind me. And I used to work in a hospital rehab. And sometimes the patients, you've got it on funny terms, they kind of roll their footrests into the bottom of the ankles. I had a friend that used to do that all the time. But something tried to do that. I turned just in time, and when I looked, it was kind of no hair, cold black eyes, white face, completely hairless and devoid of all facial hair, and it was something trying to scream at me. But its leg was up in a raised position on a wheelchair, and the left leg was covered in a cast from the hip to the toe, and it was screaming at me. And I could feel the waves of hatred, but I could hear no sound whatsoever. And that was 2 days after I got back from that trip to the farm. And then shortly thereafter, there was a sequence of events. I had a daughter that was subject to a very serious criminal assault, and not her fault in the least. And there were other issues. I had a former girlfriend phone me up and say, Murray, I think you were right about the Nephilim, which is what I believe they are, Nephilim. And she said, but I just thought you were emphasizing it too much. And then I got invited up to the by her to the day of the tornado hitting Goderich on August 21st, 2011. And so we got to share that together. That was some of our final days together. I never did marry. I felt I was never believed, and I was totally transparent from the get-go in our relationship, but I was never believed. What came to me to define it for me, and I would just like to say this: I sat down one time about the mid-'90s. I was living in my little home in Kitchener, and I put my girls to bed, and I sat down and in front of the TV, and there were the Lalonde brothers, and they were Christian producers, and they were talking about a book by a man called I.D.E. Thomas. And he wrote a book called The Omega Conspiracy. And for the first time, I had been very troubled around that time because I'd been going over to her friends every Friday nights. And one night, in close proximity to that, they had talked about Jackie Gleason claims that where a second wife had basically gone to the press and said that Jackie Gleason has seen bodies, and apparently he was very troubled by this. And my friend and I were convincing about this because I was trying to figure out, I felt a nice cold touch. The thing had a finger. Now, I didn't see the finger because I had my eyes closed. I've never lied about anything that happened. So what you're getting, just simple, unvarnished, very, very probably abbreviated testimony. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to keep my eyes closed. I did the only thing I did because I always had the sense or worry that if they found me awake, they could hurt me, and that was what was underlying me. And I don't think maybe I was frozen. Nobody else was coming to my help, and I sometimes wonder about that because my brother should have been in the room, and yet nobody was responding. Kids on that Oprah Winfrey show, the one little girl saw them come through the walls. She runs to her brother's bedroom. That's the last thing she remembers. So she ran to get help, but it didn't avail her of being safe from the experience. I would just I can't stop the overall agenda of this, what I believe the overall agenda is, and I think it's coming to its head. That's why I think things are becoming more overt.
Yeah, I'm feeling, Murray, about what the overall agenda is, because
I think it's related to something that happened eons ago, and that was interrupted by, if you will, by what's referenced in the Bible. What they're doing is they're human hybridizing. All right, they're targeting certain genetics that they desire, and they're doing so to change them. All right, they're very motivated in this. You often hear about people that the events for women will stop around menopause. I've talked to many women that way. The events will stop around menopause. All right. So the problem is that they're just not flying around these little craft to entertain us. There's an agenda here. David M. Jacobs says the same thing. They are hybridizing human beings with the goal of supplanting us by introducing their hybrids back into society. Family fun oriented. They don't help people like me. All right. They don't help other people suffering from other forms of, I would say, demonic, oppression or possession. The vast majority of churches don't want anything to do with that. I find a hard time resolving that when I read what's in the Bible about being in a battle against powers and principalities, and the reason why two separate words are used. These things are not fallen angels. They're worse than that. And the problem is they care not one whit for us. That's the one thing I did sense as a child. I sensed a complete and utter indifference. I had what I felt was a flashback memory to a possible nasal implant in mid 1960s. I used to suffer from excruciating migraines. I used to crawl home from school in grade 7 and 8. All right, I developed a stutter because of just everything that was happening. And it wasn't just what was the so-called ET stuff. It was also growing up in a war zone with a father, And the sad part about it is that through it all, I've developed a lot of empathy for people. And that's what I tried to carry into when I went to work in corrections. I didn't want to work in that anymore because I'm not going to turn the key on a man and walk away. I wanted to try to maybe share some things and impart some lives. And we're not necessarily abductees, but they had some terrible lives. So that was the one that I really remember, but there is always a sense. Every abductee has flashbacks. That's the truth. But the problem is that doesn't necessarily, flashbacks are very subjective. So all I'm saying to you is I wish it was more. I wish I could tell you that I saw the inside of a craft and I shook hands with 3 Nordics and, basically they tossed me out over my house. I don't remember what happened. I know they can move in between walls and doors. You don't need to have a fireplace. I have Since that time, in the last 5 years, I am surprised by the testimonies that I have encountered. Do I call myself a researcher? Absolutely not. I've never seen a UFO, but what I have noticed is there are patterns in this, and I can relate it to something. But I would prefer if they were interested, they could contact me at my Facebook page, and I would be glad to share that because kick-ass kid when I was a little boy, I used to fight. Well, I guess I fight now too, but the thing is that I could really fight back then, and but I knew by 8 years old, I became very withdrawn. I knew I was up against something that I could not define and could not fight against. That was the point. Just learn how to fight, and I try to share that. And anyways, my hope is that to be honest with you, I read the book of Zechariah, and at the end of it, it's chaos incorporated. But will there be a happy end? Yes, I think there will. But the sad part about it is I also know that there are going to be a lot of children tonight that are going to be experiencing the abduction phenomena. All right. And there's going to be a lot of parents scratching their head, wondering what to believe. Oh, by the way, a friend of mine in Australia used to describe her events. I asked for her permission to reference this. She used to, she's ORH negative, and she told me she used to call that the handkerchief man was chasing after her. Now, as a little girl, she sat there and said the handkerchief. Now, isn't that an interesting description? I would say, like, almost like Casper the Ghost, But to a child's way, she's trying to describe something. So I asked her, well, you think it was related to watching Casper the Ghost on TV? The thing is that, children try to vocalize these things, and they're often not too successful in getting their what they're trying to describe across, eh? To myself, there are people that advocate the same approach I do to stopping it, by the way, that deny that actual abduction is taking place. My precancerous skin lesion right here is a direct rebuttal. The fact that they have been able to document implants is a direct rebuttal to anybody who believes it's just some sort of deception. There's deception, but the actual abduction events are real and are happening.
We're coming to a close, so I'll let you go shortly. But I had a call some years ago from an 85-year-old lady. This is in the UK. And she told me that even when she was 80, she had a reptilian, as she described it, these were her words, turn up in her, I think she was in her bedroom, declare that she was owned by him or it. She just turned around and stood in her power and just said, no, I belong to Jesus. And she said, and she really started holding that thought. And she said it just began to disappear, which it did. And she was no longer troubled. But that lady then went on to tell me that she had experiences with that kind of being a lot of her life, and not one of her family knew it. She did not share it with her sons, husband, or friends.
Denial is common. The social isolation is devastating. I have
absolutely
issues. By the way, I forgot to tell you, I went to in 2006 after my father died. We were estranged, so never got a chance to say goodbye. But I went up to an AA meeting, not because I relapsed, as said, but I went up and I was talking to a fellow who was from Newfoundland about the Ghost Hill Farm. And on the way back, basically, I was praying in my little two-seater Suzuki, that little concept car. It was all of a sudden, I'm just saying, God, if you want me to go up to that farm, you're going to have to tell me one way or the other. Just stop praying. Almost instantaneously, there was a large dog came from the left that I hit. Lost control. I weaved all over the road. There was a fellow following me back from that meeting in AI, but the dog was dead. We went back to the dog, and I couldn't tell where it was from, and it broke my heart. But you know what? The thing is that when I was on the edge of the farm, I drove up the farm, and I had two big dogs weighing off the back of my PT Cruiser. And that was in broad daylight, and of course, but they really hit the car, and that was so surprising for me. But I can't. I have no way of explaining these things other than I seem to get the rug pulled out of under my feet a lot. No matter how hard I try, I've been very disciplined in my life sometimes. But Joanne, I do thank you for giving me the opportunity to, and I do reiterate, I don't radiate the joy of Jesus. I'm a believer in Yeshua. All right, my Yeshua is not big happy sappy. Put a big sunshine face on my calendar. And I often rail against people that reduce this battle against powers and principalities to some sort of emotion. I'm very skeptical of these people. More often than not, when they're questioned, they have never experienced the dark side of the beast. As I said, if anybody wants to contact me on Facebook, my heart is to outreaching, and I appreciate you sharing that with me, because you just hit the nail on the head. She trusted.
I also use the name of Christ when I have had, since I have had incursions into my own field, not for very long, I might tell you, but it has happened on occasion as if trying to put me off doing what I'm doing. But it has been very helpful, and the higher self, you know, we are more than this physical body. I know the strength of those other sources of love and light, I'm going to call them. It's powerful, more powerful than the dark. They think they've got a winning hand, but they haven't actually.
Well, my respect. No, but you know what? Anybody goes down this road, and I mean anybody, is going to have opposition and setbacks and reversals. A friend of mine is very much a rationalist and a scientist. She's reporting Men in Blacks kind of type. It's just deception. But I better let you go, Joanna.
Thank you very much for sharing that, because
Thank
you know,
you.
I think the people's experience, your experience, you've had so much to deal with alone, and so at least I hope that when you know that others will hear your story and that you have offered to help them, that's a lovely thing. And so thank you very much for that. And I'll make sure to put your Facebook details at the end of this, all the way over there in Canada.
All right. Thank you, Joanne. Bye-bye.
God bless you. Take care. Bye for now.
Right. Deepest, darkest Ontario.
Yes, indeed. Bye for now.